Hi, everyone. My name is Irma Zamora. I am the LRMD event lead, and I welcome you all to our live panel sessions with role models. There will be 3 panels, each of them focusing on different themes. For those of you watching live on YouTube, please feel free to drop questions throughout each of the sessions. The chats are monitored, and we will do our best to answer the questions in live time. Finally, please remember to stick around after the panels for more of our final videos for our event today. And with that, I will pass it on to our first panel moderator, Katie Sweeney. Welcome, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this first panel.
Thank you, Irma. We got to shout out Irma for being an amazing event lead. At this time, I'd like to call on camera Marie, Elrod, and Ariel to go ahead and join me with audio on and camera on. And I just want to say hello and welcome to everybody who's watching live, but also folks who are watching on the pre-record. We appreciate you that you are spending time with us. I am so excited about this panel, selfishly because I love you all so much with my entire heart, but also because I'm really excited for other people to get to hear from you as well. And if questions pop in from the live chat from YouTube at any point, I'll definitely move those up in the question order. So this panel is called Artivist Approaches to Creating Across Mediums. I do have questions for you all, but also tangents, anecdotes, all those things are welcome because wherever your mind goes, I am willing to follow. So I want to go ahead and just kind of start with a wide question, I suppose, and you all can kind of grab from it or build on it what you would like, and also maybe introduce yourselves as we kind of get started. So my first question is, as creators, what mediums do you like to work in, and where do you draw inspiration from, and how does this inspiration inform when and how you create? So let's maybe start with Marie, and then we'll go to Elrod and then Ariel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marie Lerma. I use a lot of different mediums. And it's also changed in how I've grown up and gotten older. So for example, in high school, in middle school, I was really into drawing and making a lot of like comics inspired stuff. I didn't make art for a while, but then I kind of dabbled with creative writing. Most recently, I'm into sewing, which I sewed this, and a little bit of creative writing and painting, but really I like to use different mediums. I'm definitely the type of person who likes to learn new things and then move on to something else. That's a lot of fun for me. As for inspiration, for me, I've always been inspired when I've read or looked at history or read different authors or looked at different artists. That kind of stuff really fuels me, as well as just my own imagination, I suppose, daydreaming, things like that. So thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elrod. I am a dancer, choreographer, filmmaker. I work in technology. I also sew. I make masks. And I am so excited to be here. Thank you. A little bit about what inspires me. I am definitely drawn to weaving things. I love the interdisciplinary kind of intersects. So I spend a lot of time with science fiction and Chicana futurism. I also like to think about Mexicanidad, surrealism, just kind of the future of border arts in general. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, Del Rio, San Antonio. So those are a lot of the places that stay with me. I also like to think about the way, the visual or embodied and emotional way that the border welcomes me home or is still with me, and how it moves in and through the work that I do. I hope I said I also am a filmmaker. I can't remember. There's so many things that I love to do, and I am always thinking about how technology and film and things like that can play a part in the work and that is produced. Thank you.
Yeah, Hi everybody, my name is Ariel Irisahri. I'm a Nuyorican artist hailing from the Bronx, now in the Midwest. And I predominantly do a lot of drawing and painting, really, both digitally and traditionally. And I feel like what always inspires me is just being really like bold. Like I almost wanted to say chaotic, but that's not the nicest word. Just trying to kind of be really bold in both like my line work and in my color. So I feel like no matter what I do, it's always just going to be loud. And like I feel like it took me a little bit to kind of grow into that, but like now I'm just like, yeah. So yeah, I think that's it.
You'll notice that I have to mute myself when y'all are talking because I'm a bobblehead who just kind of is like very quick with the affirmations, but also otherwise you'll constantly hear me saying yes to everything. Thank you for introducing yourselves and kind of giving us a snapshot of you. Something I wanted to ask you all about, especially since we have, high schoolers tuning in, is I wanted to ask you about kind of your grad school journeys and how those are interwoven, to kind of use some of Elrod's language, with art making, with being creative, especially because in thinking back to, my experience when I was applying for college, my parents really impressed, like, do law, do medicine, do something that they kind of perceived of as having a very guaranteed deliverable. And me being a creative person, I was like, how is this going to kind of potentially influence the work that I want to do? And I wonder for each of y'all, just how being creative has influenced the work that you did while you went to grad school, but also maybe how that influenced your decision to even pursue grad school as part of kind of your career and just future. So I'd love to start with Elrod and then go to Ariel and then Marie for this one.
Thanks. That's a great question. I got a late start in college anyways. I didn't go to school until I was 29. I'm telling my age now. But that was my undergraduate school. And right after that, I had tons more questions. I wasn't done researching. So I had talked to everyone and, applied, sent out for grad school, fingers crossed. And I ended up selecting OSU, the Midwest. I'd never been to the Midwest. So it was a very interesting experience to travel from, at that time I was living in Seattle, to Columbus, Ohio. So I have enjoyed, I've always been in the arts. I've never left it. It's in my bones. I can't think of doing anything else other than maybe being a mortician. It's strange. But death calls us home. So I just, I want to know more about the deeper work, the scholarship, the theory, the ways of choreographic intent, and what is artistic courage, to be, as Ariel said, like be bold, right? I could use another word right now, but I'll censor myself. But I just dove in right away and started making and creating, and being in grad school gave me a lot of resources, grants, things that I could apply for and secure in order to produce and make the work that I was envisioning. And through that comes, all of the like, this is what I'm going to do. And then you're like, oh no, that's not what I'm doing. And I have no idea what I'm doing anymore. And who am I? And what am I doing? There's like all of that comes with grad school. But overall, the journey of it is just an experience that has helped not only motivate, but move me towards the career that I have now. So grateful to have the experience.
Yeah. So yeah, like Elrod said, I feel like I was also doing art for like a long time. Like that was just something that I like loved. But also like kind of woven into that was the fact that I'm a big nerd. And I really like, at the same time that I was doing art, I was also like a kid who was like reading novels a day. So like I feel like for me, going on to pursue English in undergrad and as a graduate student, I it was natural for me to kind of see the relationship between like my like of storytelling and my like of visual art. And so I feel like they're both kind of related to me, even though my art isn't necessarily always specifically addressing literature or philosophy or anything like that in specific ways. But I feel like if there is any kind of like theoretical framework that I take with me always, it's feminist theory. So like that relationship that I have to that study, I think is always in the back of my mind when I'm making art about like women and about people of marginalized genders, and it's like, how am I presenting, these subjects, and like, and am I doing it in ways that like empower, that show something interesting, that aren't just about reinforcing a certain kind of gaze.
For me, I actually stopped doing art when I was in college until my last year, and I took 2 art classes. I never stopped looking at art or loving art or consuming art, but for me, it was definitely a shift from being a high school student and considering myself as an artist to becoming a student, and then in grad school, a researcher. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of, I guess, creative and artistic self-doubt also factored into that. But I think my studies in undergrad and as a grad student definitely helped shape how I saw the world, how I understood the world, how I theorize the world. And my degree is in women, gender, and sexuality studies. My undergraduate degrees are in history and women's studies. So a lot of those ideas that I was encountering definitely influenced my ideas about art and the ideas for art that I would come up with, but not necessarily do. When I did start to make art again and become creative again, that was definitely a process of letting myself be an artist and letting myself be creative. When I think I felt this guilt, or maybe guilt and self-doubt at the same time, like, oh, I shouldn't be an artist because there's other things to do. There's more important things to do. But really, ever since I was young, art was something that I used to cope with the world and cope with things going on. And so finding that inner artist again was definitely a really big step for me. Grad school and undergrad also taught me different forms of art and connected me with different artists that I had never ever heard of. It allowed me to study art. It allowed me to go look at art through grants and other things like that. So just because I wasn't necessarily making art doesn't mean I wasn't interacting with art or getting ideas and things like that.
Thank you all for those responses. And Marie, to kind of stay with you for a moment, because I Googled y'all in addition to knowing you. And, I obviously really enjoyed talking with you, but also reading things you've said elsewhere. And Marie, something that you include in your biography for the website Livable Futures that really resonated with me is you talked about like how storytelling sustains you, along with world building and baking, which kind of, links back to what you were just speaking on. And I wanted to ask you just kind of about, why it's so important to have practices that also exist outside of school or work. Something I really admire about your feminist practice is your commitment to self-care and just kind of time off. And I would love to just kind of have you maybe speak to students who might be struggling with some of those things about just kind of how this creativity helps to sustain you, but also to give you space outside of being a laborer.
Yeah, so I think in the process of becoming comfortable with myself, and also shedding a lot of expectations that I know I definitely got from like kindergarten on up, was definitely key in becoming an artist again. Well, not becoming an artist again, but allowing myself to be an artist again, allowing myself to be creative again. Because I forget who mentioned it earlier. Someone mentioned like the expectation to go to school and do law or something that's seen as more profitable, something that will be more respectable or have more status. And so for me, that was definitely a pressure I really struggled with in undergrad and for like the first half of my graduate school career. And so it basically let me turn away from things that made me feel good about myself, like creating art. And now I'm kind of forgetting some of the question, but also for me, reconnecting to art was reconnecting with myself. And it was also reconnecting with the things that made me feel good when things were bad, whether that was personal issues, political issues, or whatever else. Being able to tell stories, being able to create art was a way for me to push back against some of the struggles I was facing or some of the things that were happening politically or just in the world in general. And another thing about storytelling and world building and things like that is that you get to imagine something that doesn't exist right now. You get to imagine something else. And that can inspire a lot of hope, right? It's fun to daydream at a really annoying job. You daydream of something better, right? And if we think about that in terms of politics, not only can you imagine a different future, but you can also start to work towards that future as well.
Oh, I love all of that. And that like is a beautiful segue to what I wanted to ask Ariel of like that kind of same question of just thinking about, you know, I wonder how art may have helped you or been sort of a possibility for you in processing this past year that we've all kind of collectively gone through separately. And I wonder, especially for you, just like how has making art maybe allowed you to process things individual to you, but also kind of beyond that, have you used art at all as a way to also process these larger political things that we've been kind of experiencing and witnessing in kind of this ongoing structural, just structural disparity that we see between, you know, queer folks, disabled folks, people of color, right, being treated within the system. So to kind of reframe that, I guess for you, Ariel, like how has art allowed you to process or maybe be in process specifically in this last year?
Thank you for that question, Katie. I feel like that's like so like powerful. I don't know. I feel like art for me has always been very much about like Marie mentioned, you know, like imagining things that are joyful to me, that are like empowering to me, that are like fun and kind of wild alternatives to like I feel like feeling kind of like restricted and like confined by like whether that's my own expectations for myself or other people's expectations that I then impose on myself. So I feel like art has always been a kind of alternative to that for me. And I think it's also definitely been a place where I can process like anything, whether that's like my own kind of like tangential thoughts that like I call them like the id, like the where it's like that weird thought you have in the back of your head and you're like, where did that come from? And so sometimes I find that kind of fun to pull out. So it can go from personal like things like that are just super random, but it can also definitely be like a response to kind of the world, right? And I think recently I've also been leaning into that kind of part of art making for me, where it's like, how do I kind of use what I do to work through these ideas that like intellectually I understand, but like emotionally they give me trouble always, right? And so like one of the things I was working on recently was like it's kind of really, really brief like single panel comics about like things that started radicalizing me as a kid before I even knew what the word radical was. And so it was just like these things that I'd seen or that I'd noted and that made me uncomfortable, but I didn't really at the time know why they'd made me uncomfortable. And so now as an adult, I get to go back and kind of look upon the stuff that I now intellectually understand and kind of unpack that a little bit, like emotionally, like, wow, like that was like that was rough. Like, why, like, I know why I felt that way right now, but it's always just the work, you know? You're just like, ugh, I don't like this, but my brain is pointing it out to me. So maybe I'll just literally work through it, right? I'll literally draw it out, and maybe that will provide something for me, whether that's like some additional understanding or just like a confrontation that needs to be had between me and the ugly thing that I don't like to look at.
Oh, that's so powerful, Ariel, of like thinking about that kind of inner dialogue, but being it's happening differently, right? When you're able to do it in kind of this tactile manner. And this brings me to my question for Elrod. And so like recently there was a theater, dance, and media spotlight on you, and specifically you were interviewed, you know, for your position at Harvard, or like kind of talking about the Latinx movement course that you're teaching or that you taught in the fall. And you were talking about like how your work has evolved with the pandemic. And something that really stood out to me is that you said that trust is an underlying theme in the work that you create. And I would love to know a little bit more about why trust is so critical, especially with the kind of performance and art making. Like, why is that something that maybe we should be kind of tuned into or attentive to in thinking about these processes?
Woo! Okay, big, powerful things. Yes, daydreaming is powerful, Marie. And Ariel, I was thinking about reimagining, and it is radical, right? Like that space of just for all of us, all of these like rivers and veins of thought that are kind of colliding between the tactile and the embodied. So it's really, really inspiring to hear you all. Let's see, Latinx movement started at OSU. It was the first course I developed in my graduate studies, and it has continued to evolve in, you know, not only the important rigor of the body and finding Latin markers in contemporary dance and making those visible, but also expanding to the survey, to really thinking about the history of Latin dance, music, and culture, and weaving those in and through the course. So that has been exciting. The pandemic, of course, teaches us lots of things, and Zoom is one of them. And teaching dance online has been an experience, and I've grown a lot in the ways in which I think about facilitating movement. And, you know, working in the fall, this past fall was really exhilarating because there was a lot of like questioning on like, can, you know, you still have a rigorous dance class on Zoom, and how's that really going to work? And are you going to have feedback? And, you know, the room is different because we're all in frames, right? You know, watching the enrolled community really explore their movement and just find a greater place for, you know, connecting to the history, connecting to the culture, connecting to the music, and finding, you know, all these like rich moments of like, oh, they're in conversation, and my body's in conversation. And, you know, having an enrolled, you know, students say like, I've never been able to move this way, and moving this way makes me feel emotional. It makes me feel free. It makes me feel empowered. You know, that is like, woo, big things right there, just to have that, just to have those testimonies. And one of the hard things is, you know, working more individually. So I've worked to incorporate in the courses more mentorship, more individual moments to connect with every student. Courses are individually based on progress. I don't work as like a collective, you know, we're gonna see who's the best dancer, things like that. That's not something I'm interested in. I'm really interested in individual growth. So Zoom does allow that because I can schedule different meetings, and we can have our rich movement course or choreography session, and then really kind of break down individually all the questions that they might have. and that's where trust comes in, because in the communal kind of setting that I'm facilitating in the room and in the dance studio that mimics kind of social forms of Latin style, I am asking the community to be involved, to be agents of their own like progress and work. And a lot of that is trust. A lot of it is, here's a assignment that you have a week to kind of browse through and pick, and then we're just going to arrive and have a discussion together. And that discussion looks like many things. They can bring in, you know, web content, they can chat about it, they can talk, you know, on Zoom, but really facilitating a space where, you know, this is what I have to offer you for the week. And I want you to gravitate towards what feels good and what feels right. And a lot of that has been from my own mentors in adaptive liberatory and if we think about decolonial pedagogies, just thinking about ways in which to activate the room that aren't necessarily traditional. But with that comes this sense of agency that is really inspiring from the enrolled communities, and a lot of excitement to come to class and excitement to learn, and also, like, I think less pressure, which, you know, we all set our own like pressure and what we need to arise to. So that's been a lot of things that I think through. Trust and agency in the ways that can foster not only their independent growth as artists themselves, but the interdependent part of being in community and being able to co-create or co-collaborate is a lot of what I'm trying to facilitate and foster, so that when they move on to their next adventure in life, that they are ready with all those skills and transferable skills that are necessary. So thanks.
Thank you for that. I feel like I just like feel like I'm just geeking out about all three of you as I listen to you. Unbelievably, we have 2 minutes left. And so I guess in winding down, I would love to, you know, given that we have such a variety in our, you know, live and, you know, kind of after watch audience, I would love if you all could maybe share very briefly, just like an intention or a goal or a hope that you have with art going into this year, in recognizing just the many difficulties, but also the, you know, many possibilities that have kind of opened up to us through the pandemic. And maybe we can start with Marie, and then Ariel, and then Elrod, of just an intention or a goal or a hope you have for art this year as we wrap up this panel and prepare for the next one.
For me, I want to do more slow art instead of being so fast all the time. And I think I also want to work more on creative writing. So those are my two hopes or goals for this year.
Nice. I think I want to make more art. I feel like oftentimes I have just like random stretches of thinking about it but not doing it. And I want to see if I can't assemble some sort of digital show for me and some pals.
Yeah, all of those things. I think an intention for this year is what the pandemic has given is just a moment of pause, and also grief and mourning, and, you know, lots of responses in the body towards racism. And so I think there's a lot of art making in the future, a lot of film. I'm just did a premiere. I'm also gearing up to do another film. I am working with a few collaborators to see about a show in the fall, and hopefully get that going, and then emerging into a little bit more of my digital graphic design land that really thinks about the future of border art and in a Chicanx, Latina, you know, futurist type of way to lead the way, to envision and reimagine. So I'm really excited about all the things to come, and very excited to be here with you all.
I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart, because I think it's really important to also just recognize the time and care that, you know, goes into appearing on a panel or doing anything right now, because these times are really hard. And so I want to just really express how much it means to all of us that you were here, how much I appreciate just you're just so amazing and just like meaningful responses. I had to really try to reel myself in from asking more questions, because I could ask you questions for hours. But thank you so much, Marie, Elrod, and Ariel, for joining us for Latinx Role Models Day. At this time, I'm going to ask you all to go camera and audio off. And then I'm going to ask Profe Aldama to go ahead and go camera and audio on as we prepare for our next panel. Profe, thoughts about this last panel that we just had, and just kind of general reactions to LRMD. And again, shout out to Irma Zamora for being an amazing event lead, but also all of the folks who've been helping put this on, because it takes, you know, a whole team. So Profe, thoughts, reactions, feels that you're going into this next panel with Laura, just feeling.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin, and the rest of the laser team. Really amazing what you guys have been able to put together here. I know it takes a lot of work. Really incredible. I mentioned earlier, I think, you know, there's definitely a plan C or D where you guys could be flight controllers with all the things that you're doing. I loved some of the amazing kind of journeys that were just shared, the concepts of like daydreaming and the importance of daydreaming as it's kind of materialized in and through art, because daydreaming in many ways, I mean, I think a lot of us were told, well, I certainly was told when I was a kid to stop daydreaming by my teachers and pay attention. And in fact, I think it's the daydreaming that becomes the space of creation and also empathy, connection, outward kind of reaching, especially in and through art. So it was amazing to hear all of these different journeys just now. Ariel, Elrod, Marie, and their different ways that they create art. Art that is at once kind of very deeply a part of, you know, who we are, and that is kind of processing that in the world. And then it's also art that's very much outward reaching, wouldn't you say, Caitlin? And then this whole thing with this slow art and digital art, activating classrooms, as Elrod talked about. What do you think, Caitlin?
Yeah, I think it really resonates to me to think about slowness, right? And to be in slowness, to be mindful, to be present. Because it's really tempting within an academic context, within a work context, to go all the time. And I know I see this when I think about needing to get things done, right? And being really concentrated on sort of like, what's the outcome? That what comes off my to-do list first is those care practices that I need to sustain myself. And that's not an individual problem, right? That's a communal and collective problem when we don't care for ourselves and for others. And so I think something I really admire about Elrod and Marie and Ariel is how much care goes into their work, but also how much care goes into their relationship building, their story building, right? And I learn so much from them every time I speak with them, because I feel like they really open up worlds with all of the mediums that they work in. And I'm super grateful that we could use the space today for LRMD to really center artivism as a really important practice and not something that's secondary or external to, you know, to activism, and to also thinking about how we create new futures.
Yeah, another thing that was brought up that was really powerful was this idea of movement art as something that moves us, our hearts, our souls, and bodies, but also movement as a kind of necessary part of who we are. That's been for sort of you know hundreds of years now since we've been colonized, restricted, but then even more intensified as Latinx, as BIPOC communities in this country, more intensified in terms of restricted movement during the pandemic. So I thought that was a really powerful concept as well, movement.
Yeah, that feels like a beautiful segue into our next panel. So at this time, I'll go audio and camera off, and go ahead and take it away, Profe, as we go into this next space.
Okay, I am so excited. I'm going to go ahead and record this too. This is a real great honor. I am here. I'm going to be sharing my time with one of my former PhD students, Laura Fernandez. And with that, I'm going to bring up, there's Laura. I'm going to bring up a little slideshow so we can have some fun with some visuals as we walk through your journey, Laura.
Yep.
So basically, Laura is one of my incredible PhD students, now a professor at Bates College. So excited. And Laura came from Notre Dame doing her BA, where she did her BA, to the Ohio State University. And one of just maybe less than a handful of students, Latinx students in the Spanish and Portuguese department here at OSU that chose to take on the challenge of doing the PhD within Spanish and Portuguese as focused on Latinx pop culture. But we're going to get into all of this journey in just a minute. In the meanwhile, Laura, welcome. So happy for you to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Aldama, for, I feel like I should be asking you questions, talking about a career, a talk on passions and being successful in the field. I'm like, who more than Dr. Frederick Aldama? I feel like I should be, bowing to you and asking you these questions. So, but thank you for having me and for moderating this panel.
Well, I'm so excited to learn more about your journey, Laura. It has been quite a journey for you, many obstacles overcome. Can you share with our audience, with our new gens, with folks, tuned in right now? Here we have this, bridge making with community and the journey that you've had to kind of take on. Let's hear your origin story, how you got to Notre Dame and the things that you overcame. And I know that things like the MSPS there at Notre Dame were important to you as well. So maybe less fighting Irish and fighting Latina. But yeah, tell us about those obstacles overcome.
Yeah, so starting, early high school, not early high school, but, the high school path to college, I was very lucky that I had an older sister who went through the process before me. Because she was really able to guide me through the process, telling me, you need to do this, you need to apply to this, do this, take this FAFSA, take this test, because she had to do it all on her own. So my parents, they immigrated from Colombia. They were not, they didn't attend college, especially not here in the US, so they had no idea. So I was lucky enough that I had my older sister to guide me. And then in senior year, I was lucky enough that we had a new guidance counselor. This one was a woman of color who approached me individually, and she said, Laura, I know you have goals beyond Virginia. So many people in my high school stayed kind of in colleges near the area. And she's like, I know you want to get out. I know you have the means to go to a university somewhere beyond here. And so she helped me really to find ways to apply to different colleges and do so in a way that wasn't a financial strain. So I was really lucky to have her helping me. But I guess and then going to Notre Dame, one of the major obstacles, and I mentioned the MSPS because it kind of, which is the Multicultural Students Program and Services, because I kind of overshadowed my entire experience at Notre Dame. I was invited there as a senior to come visit for free, which was great, as part of this multicultural student visit. So this whole notion of me as multicultural was always kind of my main identity at Notre Dame. I was always that Latina student in the class. So it was really emphasizing for me kind of the exceptionalism that many Latino students are kind of forced into. This notion that, oh, Laura, you're the Latina, so kind of talk about the Latina experience. We talk about Latinos in this way. That's correct, right? From your experience. So I had to be that voice of otherness. And even with my friends, my family would call me on the phone, and I'd obviously speak Spanish to them, and they would kind of like stop and stare. So it's kind of like the weird circus show of speaking Spanish in front of these majority white upper class students. So that was kind of one of the obstacles I had to overcome, that, you know, I'm not the only one here, and this shouldn't be the way. So that's kind of really what got me into laser initially, was just this notion of, we need these numbers of students in higher education, because they shouldn't feel excluded. They shouldn't feel like they're the only ones there. And I guess, yeah.
Really powerful, Laura. And you made the decision to come to OSU. You did very actively sort of help grow laser to what it is today, which is just absolutely amazing. Tell us, you know, what were some of the obstacles that you overcame as a graduate, as a Latina, as a PhD student, you know?
I think one of the main obstacles I've always had to overcome is just this idea, the fear of rejection. I came to be in a Spanish and Portuguese program because when I applied for a PhD program in my initial field, I was rejected. And I luckily had a professor in Notre Dame who brought me into the Spanish and Portuguese section there. And then at OSU, I was kind of dealing with going into the job market repeatedly, and, you know, facing the notion that you might not get that job that you think you are owed, but really learning how to overcome that rejection, what it is you have to do in order to keep moving forward. So, all right, I didn't get this one. What do I need to do? What do I need to change here? How can I, you know, use this narrative, use what I've learned to kind of help me in the future.
Really powerful. We've talked a little bit about some of those challenges. What about surprises for you? And we have this sort of wonderful set of slides with you presenting at conferences and big lectures on Latinx pop culture and laser. And yeah, what were some of the positives and some of the great surprises for you?
Yeah, for me, one of the main things was the performance aspect of teaching. I am not someone who's very nervous in front of big crowds. And even now I'm like, oh, I'm so nervous to be talking with everyone, but I can still go in front of a classroom and perform every day and not feel that sense of anxiety. You can see that image of me sharing myself as a crazy person in a shark's head, and I'm willing to share that aspect with myself, with my students, because there's a sense of comfort that I didn't expect to feel being in front of the students. And also, I think laser is its own surprise, being able to work with these high school students, giving back what, you know, giving back what I learned as a high school student, I needed that help from my older sister, and if I could give that kind of help to these students, I think that was really a really great thing that I could give to these kids. And seeing them succeed, seeing a student who said in the beginning of the year, a senior who didn't plan applying on college, ends up actually going to college, you know, in the fall. That's its own reward.
Yeah, lots to celebrate, including your own. I mean, a Latina getting a PhD and now as a professor, that's a huge, huge celebratory moment.
Yeah, especially during COVID, you know, I think I'm a little sad I never got that handshake moment of Dr. Fernandez, congratulations. But here you see the image of me defending my dissertation. And yeah, now not just myself, but my sister is also a doctor. So it's just kind of continuing the legacy of what she helped me start.
So incredible. What a journey. Laura, tell us about your actual scholarship, your cultural work, the way you kind of dig into pop culture.
So before coming to OSU, I didn't even think about studying pop culture. I think the field is much more heavily focused on literature and these kind of notions of high culture. But when I came to OSU on the visit for, you know, do I want to even come to OSU for a PhD program, I actually saw you giving a presentation on pop culture, and it was like my mind was blown. I was like, wait, I can do this. I can actually study these things and be taken seriously. So that's really what made me choose OSU, was the ability to work with you and do these kinds of things that I love, because I've always been a pop culture nerd. I'm always, referencing some movie or some TV show or another. And in my way, how I wanted to take pop culture was, I've been living in the Midwest for however many years at that point. As a child, as a Navy brat, living in the Midwest for 10 years seemed like forever for me. So I was like, how can I bring in my history of being in the Midwest with what I love of pop culture? And so what I focused on were television shows that were set in the Midwest, and how those narratives reflect or don't reflect the reality of people who live in that region.
Wow. And something like Superstore, just give us a little nugget, like what you found in a show like Superstore.
Yeah, so a show like Superstore, which had America Ferrera as a producer and had her as kind of the main star, really was able to kind of turn the narrative on itself of who is the other, who should be seen as the exotic character. And so in this store, these workers, these characters are all different ethnicities and come from different backgrounds, but it's not them who are seen as like the people to be mocked. Instead, it's these people who are attending the store who are predominantly white, who are just seen as these crazy characters who are just seen as completely at odds with the reality of what these people are living. So it's kind of turning the gaze back onto white culture as to who should be seen as the other.
So the gaze, tell us about you were just talking about turning the gaze back on white culture. What is this gaze? What is the Latinx gaze? And as a conceptual tool for you, and how might it open our eyes to things like the over hypersexualization that we see with Latinas in mainstream?
Yeah, for me, the Latinx gaze is the ability for narratives that kind of depict Latinidad from what I see as an authentic perspective, of being able to turn that perspective on its head onto what is seen as a predominantly white audience. How can white culture be seen as othered, and how can we make Latino culture be seen as something that is normal, just as white culture is seen as the norm? And I think nowadays we're seeing that in a way with maybe not with Latinas and the hypersexualization, but I think with women in general. We see the Free Britney movement. We see the response to Meghan Markle. So we see kind of this changing in the narrative of, oh, maybe we shouldn't talk about women in this way. Maybe in the future we'll start seeing that, oh, maybe we shouldn't have over-sexualized Sofia Vergara. Maybe we shouldn't have overly sexualized Salma Hayek in these moments, or J-Lo, and just talk about her body. So maybe, hopefully, I don't see it happening yet, but I think there's a turn towards it, I think, with what the narratives are changing nowadays.
Yeah, and again, testament to how incredibly important your work is, and how a kind of cultural work bridges, right? Speaking of bridges, the ivory tower with our communities, with the mainstream, with popular culture. What are you seeing as some major differences between Latinx pop culture yesterday, that which we have been creating, and that which is today?
So I think the focus on diversifying the narratives, focusing on not just all Latinos look the same, focusing on the Afro-Latinx experience, or, just the Latina experience in some different shows such as Vida, the Afro-Latinx experience in the Netflix miniseries When They See Us. And I think just who's doing the writing, who's doing the talking in these shows, in these new narratives, is what's really important. I think there's still ways to go. The Selena, the series, wasn't my favorite, because I think there is an unfortunate moment of whitening the character of Selena to make her more palatable to a larger audience. But I think if more shows are given, this own voice, I think that's what's important. If it's not coming from us, well, where is it coming from, and what does that say about the narrative?
Absolutely. This idea of both behind, in front of the camera, in the writer's room, until that happens in a really saturated way, we'll always be kind of pushing against people getting it wrong, right? Let me ask you, can you share with us some of your methods, your ways that you bring Latinx pop culture into your classroom learning spaces?
Yeah, so one way I like to do it is kind of mixing what's as the canonical with the mainstream. So in one course I taught Nuestra América by Jose Marti, this canonical essay, and I follow it up with Calle Trese's Latinoamérica, and making students find those connections between a text that was written in the late 1800s to something that was written a couple of years ago, and how these narratives haven't changed, these narratives of oppression, these narratives of kind of fighting back against the giant that is the United States. And just kind of always trying to bring in music or music videos, something that's quick for students to be able to grasp and analyze, without having to kind of go too far into that narrative, something I can introduce quickly. And how coming up, I'm going to be teaching a course on Latinx and Latinas in film, and kind of using that as a way to do a kind of intro to Latino studies via these films that people might be aware of, like Selena, like The Book of Life, like Dora, or things like that.
I was so pleasantly, I loved, I have to say it, Dora, the film adaptation recreation. It was like, I just loved it, to be honest with you. And so much more interesting and so much more thoughtful than the animation cartoon, right, that has taught so many kids across this country. What was your take on Dora, the recreated version in the film, just in a nutshell?
I will be honest and say I have not seen it, because I assumed it was going to be bad, just from the.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry,
I know, it's so good. It's so great. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it, and you definitely have to have it on.
That's on me for assuming things.
Well, you definitely have to put it on your list to teach, because I think your students are going to be pleasantly surprised, just as you will be. Where is the vitality? Where do you see the vitality in Latinx pop culture and in Latinx cultural studies in general? Where are you seeing the life force?
So I think there's this, for me, it's the diversity of narratives and forms that are coming out in today, in pop culture. So this notion of looking at lowbrow culture versus high culture, I don't think we can make those distinctions anymore. I think there's, the tried and true methods of television, film, that there's, things that are coming out every day. There's Dora that's, changing narratives. But I think there's also new areas to look at, such as YouTube or Twitch, people streaming games and how the Latinos on Twitch. There's Latino TikTok, there's Latino Instagram influencers. I just think there's such a variety in narratives to look at nowadays. I'm excited to keep studying, keep learning.
Yeah, it's there's such an abundance. It's pretty incredible, and the abundance. Sometimes I worry that in the abundance we might be getting lost as well in the sort of algorithms of like a Netflix or something, right?
Yeah.
So they pick up Robert Rodriguez, but they might not pick up something that's a little bit lesser known. I don't know. I'm thinking Vampires versus the Bronx or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it is a time. It's funny, in times past, there was moments in the 80s and the 90s and the early noughts, when we were really celebrating this kind of the moment, the rising of the brown tide in cultural production and visibility. And I wonder, and then of course we were kind of let down, right? So we're at 19% of the population. We are the majority, historically underrepresented. And yet, we are, hovering around the 3% represented across all kind of media in this country. Do you think we are seeing a shift in the tide, a real brown tide rising, or should we be rethinking this? I don't know. What do you think?
I think even if there is a rise in the tide, we can't grow complacent. I think we should always be pushing for more. I think that's always kind of like, oh, look, we arrived. No, we haven't yet, really, we're eventually going to become the majority population. So we can't just, settle on our laurels. We can't just accept these menial positions that we're given. Just like we can't accept that we have a female as vice president, we shouldn't reach for more. I don't know, we need to keep pushing for more. And I think, pushing these narratives, pushing these TikTokers maybe that aren't getting as much traction as some of the bigger numbers are, pushing those towards the forefront, I think is always going to be important.
Yeah, absolutely. So not only supporting our creatives and their work, but also supporting them through the amplification, right? So Laura, tell us, as we wrap this up, we have about 4 minutes. What advice can you share? You've already shared so much about your journey, the challenges overcome, also the kind of positives and the surprises. What can you share with our next gen Latinxs as a gesture of kind of bridge building and bringing forward?
I guess something that I heard recently that is sticking with me is that a straight line is boring. So don't be afraid if your trajectory isn't as clear cut as you expected it to be, because it's going to bend backwards or take a left or right turn that you weren't expecting, and that's okay. And you should accept that as something positive. And something that I've really learned is to take a moment to take that weird class or that thing that you weren't expecting to do, take that weird opportunity and run with it. For me, that's how I managed to get on a archaeological excavation in Albania, because I took a random class in classical archaeology and I learned to be nice to the professor. That's how I ended up on my path to a PhD. I took a course on cannibalism because it just sounded weird and sounded interesting. So don't be afraid to take those classes that maybe don't fit the norm of what you should be taking, and always make sure you're making yourself known to people who can help you, those mentors, taking advantage of the people that are there, taking advantage of your laser mentors. And I think something that I still struggle with is being kind to yourself. I think I am so much more willing to accept faults in others than I am in myself. And I think we need to learn to, accept that we aren't perfect. And as I said, rejection has been a major part of my narrative. And I need to learn to be kind to myself about that. And so, yeah. And also, I guess, oh, sorry. In that narrative of the Latino exceptionalism, take that as a myth, question why we are the exception to that norm. Why aren't there more Latinos in higher education? And don't accept that. Don't accept yourself as just some one-off exception. Push for more, push for these numbers to change.
Really powerful, Laura. You're talking about feeling, empowered to ask, to follow paths that might otherwise have been denied you. What we're really talking about goes back to our last panel. It really is about movement. It's about, putting yourself in those spaces that might not be as familiar, especially when we're in college. It's a great opportunity for that. Really, I think, Laura, you're really getting us to think for our new gens about how to grow through others and empathy, and especially important as we kind of hopefully come out of the other side of this time of the pandemic. Really powerful, Laura. I have nothing but my great gratitude and thanks. You have been absolutely incredible here. You were an incredible student and you were an amazing colleague. Thank you, Laura Fernandez. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone, and thank you, Laser.
Okay. as we offboard, we can move into our next panel.
Hola, Profe. That went pretty well. Thank you so much, Laura, and also Profe for moderating the panel.
Absolutely. You know, it's amazing how bridging community, our theme, the bridging part has really allowed us to explore this concept of movement, which I think we are also, you know, hungry for. As I mentioned early, historically, we've been as a community in this country very restricted in our movements, and especially intensified during the pandemic. What are your thoughts, Irma, about the panel so far?
I mean, they've all been so amazing, as you point out. Like even they've all been connecting, sort of. I don't know, like somehow they've all connected really well with the theme, and all the journeys that we've heard from all of our panelists so far just demonstrate like the diverse like paths that people can take to graduate school and beyond. And I think especially hearing right now from Laura, just even that reflection on going through high school and getting to college, with the importance of mentorship, which we'll get into the next panel, and even especially in the Midwest, thinking about the Midwest as a point for bridges of our different communities that are coming not only from here, like here in Columbus, but also the Southwest, the East Coast. The Midwest can be seen as a bridge in that sense. What about you? How did you find these two panels?
Yeah, I agree. I love too that we're really able to put a spotlight on what is the real vitality of creation and intellectual, actively engaged intellectual work that's happening here, Latinx Midwest. I think it's, you know, Role Models Day, LRMD 2021. You know, we don't have the 500 plus kids on campus, but you know, you guys have done an extraordinary job. You, Peyton, Adriana, Miles, Juliana, Caitlin, and others in the laser team to really pull off something that I hope will intensify, highlight, emphasize what we are doing here in the Midwest, and that it's as active and important here as places like the Southwest or places like New York, specifically places like Washington Heights and Brooklyn and the Bronx and so on. So I love that we have a focus on the kind of middle and the Latinx movement that's happening here in the middle.
Yeah, agreed. Especially, and I mean, we see like the great like research potential as well, but also like the lived experiences for not only of us, like the transplants to the Midwest, or temporary at least, but also folks who are growing up here and just giving us so much more to talk about and really learn from, who are here from the Midwest. And just,
yeah, you know, Irma, it's funny because, you know, I don't know your experience, but you're from the West Coast, and, you know, I know you went to Amherst and now you're here. And, you know, Laura was talking about in college taking courses that, you know, might not be, say, exactly comfortable or fitting, but also, I mean, in a way, you're a transplant. I mean, you're here in the Midwest, and gosh, I mean, and bridge making here in the Midwest as a Latina transplanted from the West Coast.
Yeah, I mean, I have been reflecting. That's, I think, a lot of things that Laura was talking about resonated a lot with my own personal journey. Just I forget how she phrased it, but the not straight path, kind of a more winding path. It's somehow that really resonated, even going from the West Coast to the East Coast. Now I'm in the Midwest. That is really winding. That's not where I ended up. This is not where I thought I was going to end up, but also just thinking that, yeah, that's been more interesting. It really opens up a lot more ways, not only to build bridges, but also get to know bridges, if that makes sense, of the different communities that are throughout the United States. So that's been just a different type of lived experience that I was not expecting. And
Irma,
really
what were some of, let me just ask you, what some of your deepest and most sort of honest challenges have been coming from a West Coast Califas, which is majority Latinx, to a place like Columbus, Ohio?
I mean, yeah, it's like Laura was pointing out, kind of coming to a predominantly white institution, just navigating, having those questions of like, yeah, you're the representative of Latinos or Latinas in general, kind of having that, but also just along with that in terms of living and existing in a city like Columbus, in a state like Ohio, just navigating certain cultural like experiences I don't think I had lived through before, being stared at for talking Spanish, etc. Those are in terms of challenges. In a more joking way, of course, the food's not the same as in California, but that's a different thing. There's been some challenges.
Yeah, so in a way, I mean, it's like you can't really take it for granted, and so we really have to do the work. Sometimes I feel like when I'm in Califas, we can sort of take it for granted. But of course, that has its downsides as well, right?
Yeah, I think in terms of just living and then coming here, I think right here, I've been able to grow, especially going to Amherst and then coming here. It's like a different kind of growing experience, right? Like you learn really to appreciate certain things, and also just the importance of those bridges, of building that community. Again, to bring it back to the theme, that's kind of crucial, and in living beyond these spaces that you already occupied and that you grew up with, that are predominantly like Latinx, living in spaces that are not really strengthens your way of how do you build these bridges, how do you build community, and your understanding of what community can look like and the possibilities for that.
You know, going back to our theme again, and Anzaldúa as an inspiration for this year's LRMD, and the concept and practice of taking our borderlands with us everywhere, and also this concept and practice of the open wound. After hearing some of the panels today, Irma, what are your thoughts on both of these experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we heard it, like even in a kind of more plain sense, kind of thinking about feminist theory, like a lot of our activist panels do stick with that, but also thinking about how do we blend our identities, right, into our work, how do we bring that in? We've heard it from how Ariel, Elrod, and Marie talked about it through their work. How do they bring that not only with the artwork, but also they're crossing that and interweaving, I think Elrod said, with her artwork and the work, her like academic research area. But also we heard that a lot with, we're allowed to touch on that recently in this last panel regarding like her own experiences, and also just how does she go out into the job market, this experience of not only coming through college and then going to graduate school, but like now expanding out of it, just learning that and bringing those experiences of the Latina and like that interweaving again of her her love for pop culture and research, and knowing the importance of that into her teaching and expanding it out and creating these new courses at Bates for her, right? So I think that's how we've been seeing these kind of theories that emerge from our core text that we're kind of calling back on.
Wow, really powerfully insightful. Thank you. And you know, one last question for you, Irma. You know, when you go home, and I know it's been difficult for you to, you know, during the pandemic, but what do you feel like you're bringing back to a place like California, majority Latinx family in California, from your time here in the Midwest?
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. I think I just bring back a lot of like the experiences of, yeah, like we need to strengthen these, our understanding of Latinidad and our understanding of who where people live, and I just bring it back home. Like, yeah, there's a strong community there. We didn't think about it, but also like we should be building these bridges with each other across communities.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, yeah, I think I was just gonna head. I think our panelists are ready. So thank you so much, Prof. Aldama, and we'll see you.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
On that note of bridging across the nation, across our communities, I will hand it to you, Irma. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna welcome our role models for the next panel. Daniela, Christine, Lourdes. I believe that you can turn on your cameras and your mics. We'll be starting soon. Yes, hi. It's so nice to see you all. For everyone else out there, welcome to our last panel, our last live panel for this session. This is the name of this panel is Community Empowerment, Empowering Latinx Youth. We have our amazing role models here. So Daniela Aponte, who's a student at Beloit College. Hi. Christine Miranda from a volunteer coordinator at Movimiento Cosecha, and Lourdes Barroso de Padilla, currently the Vice President of Stakeholder Engagement for City Year Inc. So hello everyone, I hope that you all are doing well. It's so amazing to see you. I know that was a kind of a quick introduction. You can expand on this as I ask the first question. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll open it up right now with just you telling us a little bit about how you decided to pursue or what inspired you to pursue higher education, and tell us about any potential mentors, how they guided you through this journey, how that came about for you. Let's go ahead and get started with Daniela, then go to Christine, and then Lourdes.
Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Daniela. I am a first generation college student, but at the same time, I'm also the youngest of two siblings. So like by the time I was graduating 8th grade, my brother, like the same year my brother was graduating college. So in a way, it's like I kind of knew that was something for me because I had my siblings as like role models, and then like they kind of helped me figure out, college is something for me, even though like as a first gen student that they've made it possible and that I could also make it possible. So that's kind of, what I also want to help inspire other people to do. And like profession wise, I am thinking about being a teacher, and, it hasn't just been like one specific teacher, but just kind of a snowball effect of multiple teachers pushing me onwards to like pursue higher education and seeing the different things that I can do.
Hi everyone, I'm Christine. Like Irma said, right now I'm an organizer with Movimiento Cosecha, which is an immigrant group organizing undocumented immigrants across the country. And yeah, I think for the first part of the question, thinking back to high school and just the decision to pursue college, I think I definitely came from a position of privilege, and that I had, support of my family, kind of always thinking that college would be a path for me. I think what where kind of the importance of mentorship kind of more came into play is kind of figuring out from my college experience, which I think pretty early on became very challenging. I went to Amherst College as Irma did. And I think probably already by my second year, I felt really overwhelmed by the institution. I had my friends and the different activities I was involved with on and off campus, but just the institution itself felt very overwhelming, I started to feel very disillusioned, and with academia and, all the different things, that you learn about the world at large. And I think I remember back to one of the first ethnic studies class I had, kind of when I shared with my professor that all the things that we were learning were just making me feel very, felt hopeless about the world. And kind of while holding a lot of compassion and empathy, she was like, actually, it's the opposite. It's important to learn how the world that we live in came to be, but so that you can understand that, this is not just, the way that things were destined to happen, but rather a world that was intentionally created and shaped that you need to understand to be able to also be a part of that. And that's not doom and gloom. That's, learning in community with other people so that you actually can find your place in that and actually have agency. And so that professor ended up becoming my advisor, and I think was a really important role model for me in being able to think critically about, do I want to pursue academia, or kind of what kind of career do I see for myself after college. And immediately after graduating, I did stay in academia for a little bit. I lived in Panama on a Fulbright grant, but kind of after that experience and drawing a lot on kind of the advice from my professor, I kind of, decided that I actually wanted to pursue organizing more. And it was really important to have kind of role models or other people who I saw who didn't have as a typical or standard career, and actually who wanted to encourage people to try paths like that.
Hello everyone. Funny story, in mine, Christine, my husband went to Amherst. This is like and I know it's like all in the family. So I am Lourdes Barroso de Padilla. I am one of those very rare Midwest born and bred here in Columbus unicorns, Latina unicorns, I should say. My parents came from Cuba, and I was born 6 years after they came to America. And actually here on the East Side, I'm a boomeranger, so I moved to the East Coast for a while, and then I actually lived in a bunch of different places, East Coast mainly, and then moved back to Columbus. And I've worked for City Year for 20 some years, and City Year is an education-focused organization where we have young people. It's an AmeriCorps program. So AmeriCorps is a corporation for national and community service. So it's an opportunity for not just young people, but Americans of all ages to give back to their community in a different way. We work, if you've ever heard of NCCC or other organizations, whether it's after school programs or Meals on Wheels programs, AmeriCorps programs are vast and different. And it is a pathway for college for many people, especially non-traditional folks, to pay for school. You do get money at the end of your term of service. And then there's some universities and colleges that will actually match your post-educational award. So you could double that. So you could have almost $20,000 to go to school, and which is originally why I started doing City Year. And similar to Christine, I think when I was serving my first year in service, I was actually sent to San Antonio, Texas to start up City Year in San Antonio. And it was interesting because I'd always lived in Columbus, and I used to joke around and say that I was a Latina on the weekends, because that was when we went to Latin, that's when we went to Spanish speaking church. When I went to like my youth groups, we went to every quinceañera and baile and everything else that was happening in the community, right? And so when I moved to San Antonio, it was the first time that I had lived in a city where it was majority Latinos. And it was like the opposite experience, Irma, of what you were describing. I caught the tail end of your conversation where, I met Latinos who had Latino last names, who had accents, and even speak Spanish. And I clearly know American history, but I was like, every Latino that I knew up until that point in my life, I was like 18, was not of this land. I was one of the few who was actually born here. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. And so, it started both my journey of self-identity, but also what it means to be educated. My father had the equivalent of 8th grade education when he came from Cuba, but he was a businessman, owned the first Latino food store here in Columbus, and educated himself by reading books. And so I started on a path of, really being an advocate in communities, being an activist, doing much more of that work. And so it really became, for me, part of my life's work to offer people opportunities in which they can, find a path to education. Now all of our work at City Year revolves around keeping students in track and on track to successful high school graduation by providing very specific interventions for them. And we're in 29 cities around the country. Some of them are Latino strongholds. And then in addition to that, I'm also the director of an organization called the Latina Mentoring Academy, which is a professional development organization here in Columbus. It's the only one of its kind in the state where we take Latinas from all walks of life. There is no educational requirement, there is no career requirement, but we understand that Latinas need a sense of belonging. And so when you talk about mentorship, when you talk about seeing yourself both in your community, and not just seeing yourself, but seeing a place for yourself in your community. And that's what LMA does. So in addition to these professional development workshops, that all of them are from the lens of really celebrating your Latinidad. And it's not about like having to whiten yourself to fit into the culture, but really how to use every part of your authentic self as an asset into every space that you're coming into, especially in the work environment. And then we also pair you with a professional Latina that helps you through that journey. So whether you're working on your personal goals or professional goals, you have a Latina who's been there, who kind of understands that and can work with you on achieving that goal while you're here in the organization.
Thank you, all of you, for your amazing answers. That already gets us really well set up for our next question, which I guess all of you sort of touched on right now. What do community care and empowerment mean to you? So how do you integrate these practices into your career or your studies and pursuing how you work towards it? Let's start off with Lourdes. I'll go to Daniela and then Christine.
That's a big question. I think, you know, growing up here, especially I think in Columbus, where I was the only Latina in many spaces that I went to, that I was in. I don't think, and I think that, you know, when you're first generation, you know that saying, ni de aquí, ni de allá, like you are experiencing two cultures that are very much at odds with each other and cause attention, right? And you're getting these mixed messages all the time about like who you are and how you should show up and what that means. And, you know, you need to be more this, you need to be less that, you need to, I think that it can become confusing. And so I think that starting this journey of really understanding who I was and understanding my identity and how I describe it. And I can't describe my identity the same way that my parents, who are political refugees, do. I can't even describe it the same way that my sisters, who were older than I was, but they were little when they came here, that impacted how they saw the world. And I fundamentally understood that for myself. And so I think that creating spaces and understanding how I could uplift other Latinas and other women in places where they could, again, be their most authentic selves, that we could, we have the ability to welcome people into our spaces, right? No matter who we are, to create that sense of belonging. And so for me, I feel like at every level of leadership that I've ever been at, if I get invited to a conversation, I'm always like, who can I bring in? Who else can I bring to this conversation, right? If a door opened for me, I held it open with my elbow and said, come on, girl, let's go. If I got invited to a table, I was like, even if we had to bring our own chair or bring a folding chair for someone else, it was like, you know, let me scoot over so you have a place here. So for me, it's always that idea of like, how are we bringing others along with us, and how are we forging spaces for ourselves? And when you have the opportunity and the privilege of being at a certain level of your career, or, you know, of your activism or whatever it is, right? When you gain that certain amount of like clout or power, whatever vocabulary word you want to use, how are you using that to empower other women or other people, our people as a whole? I'm currently a candidate for the Columbus City Council. When I'm elected, because you have to manifest things into the world, I will be the only Latinx person who has ever served on the Columbus City Council, which is huge because we are about to be the 13th largest city in the country, the second largest city in the Midwest outside of Chicago. And we've never had representation at this level in our city, right? When we know that the number one contributor of our growth as a city is our immigrant, refugee, and migrant population. And so the opportunity that this presents for our people, because to me, this is a win for all of us, is huge. And so what power and influence do you then have when you're at that level to influence conversations and to have representation and to bring other people into that dynamic as well?
Thank you. Daniela?
Yeah, so I kind of could speak about the mentoring aspect. So one of my actual like literal jobs is like being a peer mentor on campus. So specifically with CEL, which they renamed, it was part of the federally funded TRIO program. So like the Student Success Stories, McNairs, and Upward Bound. So it's like part of that collective. So my job is to mentor. I have a caseload of 4 first generation low income or students of documented disability, and I have to meet with them weekly and just like really like you build that community by opening up the space. So like, yes, I have to meet with them weekly, but then I do a lot of things outside, like, oh, creating care packages for midterms, you know, like, okay, let's all have a dinner together because, you know, dining hall food isn't the best. Or even just like outside of just having to ask, like, how are you feeling? How are classes doing? Like opening up the chat for like chisme hours, which, you know, some of my mentees would say like, OMG, can you believe like this guy is ghosting me or something? And it's just like having that space so they could relate to you other than just like, okay, well, like I have to report to you. And then like not even just like mentoring or helping others in that formal setting as a job, but like I know I have a neighbor who I used to be close friends with when I was growing up. And now we aren't as close, but she often comes to me like, hey, like in Chicago, the high school, like you had to apply to high schools because there was like different ones, like there was the neighborhood ones, then there was like the IB, there was selective enrollment. So she didn't really know what to do. So just like having that chat, like you're keeping yourself open for those conversations so people feel safe and can confide in you just really helps, like, I guess, empower the community since everyone, you know, needs that support, whether it's like super formal or just like sitting down in a casual conversation and be like, hey, I'm kind of confused about this. What did you do in the situation? You know?
Thank you, Daniela. Christine?
I think this is going to end up being my plug for community organizing, basically. But because I think to start out, something that when you think about community care and empowerment, particularly in terms of like your own, trying to figure out your own professional career path, you just need to kind of understand that the dominant US culture, that even if we come from other cultures as well and other communities as well, that's just like the air we breathe everywhere, particularly, you know, as part of like an elite institution, like everything there is obsessed with the individual. So on one side, like the lifestyles they require, when like how you spend your time, or the fact that you live physically separated from communities that you come from, it's designed to be isolated. Success is thought of like when you're able to be self-sufficient and live on your own. And even kind of most of the way that, you know, any like minority community ends up like defining success, it's kind of to be, you know, often can be kind of like framed as like to be like the token person of your community that gets to make it this far or be in this place. Kind of everything about how you're taught to understand like professional success, it's in that individualistic metric. And it can be really hard to kind of develop an understanding and think about what you want for yourself that's outside of that. But I also think that's really important, and that's something that you have to actually have to sit with and think about for a long time. Because I think for a long time, like I definitely thought of success in that way of like to be able to achieve and get awards and get accolades and get particular positions. Like literally every professional career path tells you that that's what you have to do to have success. And I think when I think about community care in a way that's actually meshed with your professional career, as opposed to this is how I can have professional success, and then eventually once I reach a certain level, I'll be able to give back. I think a little bit you kind of have to say, what if I actually kind of just like kill my ego a little bit and imagine figuring out like my big picture success for myself in a way that's actually defined by the community, not just me. And that's just like really not easy, right? And so I think that's why community organizing can be a really powerful, and that can happen on so many different scales, whether it's like on campus or in the building that you live in with the other tenants there, or actually in your community fighting for something. But just kind of the different relationships that are created when people are kind of like horizontally on the same playing field, fighting for something that they all have an interest in, that they all want. And then kind of the actual empowerment that comes from learning how to fight for something together is just really profound, and really like the antithesis of the idea of actually to be successful, you got to climb the ladder, and that's the only thing that's considered, you know, worthy or important. And I think it's just like a challenging conundrum that actually people you need to grapple with over like a long period of time, of what's success going to look like to me, that's going to maybe be different from what my parents think, or the institution I'm at thinks, or most messaging I get from society thinks.
No, thank you. That's actually super powerful. And it really lends itself well to our next question, thinking about relationships and community and like learning from each other. I think I just want to ask all of you how you see that relationship between um, role models or having a mentorship relationship and community empowerment, community organizing. How does that centered in your own experience, or how do you see that centered with community in general? So let's go ahead and start with Christine, then go to Daniela, and then Lourdes.
Yeah, one of the first things that I thought, even just like thinking about mentorship in general, is it's this piece of artwork by Ricardo Levens Morales, the Minneapolis-based Puerto Rican artist. Lots of famous artworks. You've maybe seen some of his posters. And it's a younger and an older woman kind of sitting side by side in the forest. And the older woman is like up against a tree trunk, and then her body kind of like melds into the roots of the tree. And the poster is called Mentorship. And so I think the reason I thought of that, and I think what that speaks to, is just this idea of like deeper connection, not just like with one individual person, but kind of different like lineages from different places. I think like for me, particularly when I kind of a lot of my career has been thinking of like, oh, I am interested in being involved in community organizing. I have all these questions and doubts about these institutions that I've been part of. Am I the only one who's ever thought these like questions and critiques? And no, I'm not. People have been struggling with those questions for, there are so many long lineages in our own cultures and other people's cultures of resistance and organizing. And you really need to, it's really important to be able to access and learn from those, like learn from communities, learn from your own ancestors, and kind of the ways that that's also that can also be a source of mentorship, but not like maybe in the way that you like at face value would think of it. And I also think, I know it's challenging because often the only time that people have access to mentorships is like within their job or within like it's just really clearly bound by their position. Like somebody else at this company or at this academic institution above me can be my mentor. But I think it's just really important to be able to find people who will be invested in like your growth beyond the bounds of that institution, because maybe what's best for you and maybe the way that you're trying to grow is not just at that one place. And so I think also just to be able to have mentorship that can go beyond that is really essential. It sounds like the other two panelists are kind of involved in that kind of mentorship. So I will pass off to the next.
Yeah, like to echo what Christine was saying, I think it's like good like point where like you do have that mentorship in programs where it's like, oh yeah, like you're assigned to this person's gonna mentor you, but then also like so there's some situations where you kind of find your own mentor, like, you know, they're not assigned to you, but you kind of just like, you know, kind of latch on to them in a way, asking them questions, even though they don't have like a professional relationship with, or like they're not from your job. It could just be like someone from the community who you know. So it's like really interesting to see that, especially like when we're thinking about mentorship and community building, it's like everyone has the capability to be a leader. Of course, maybe sometimes whether that's like developed yet or they're like maybe not confident in that ability, that's kind of where mentorship plays that part where you're helping connect the individual to opportunities that will help them build that confidence and like empower them to become that leader, to help continue building that community, especially because like community building isn't just linear, it's like a cycle. Every time, you know, like not like the needs of me being in college isn't like the same experience or the needs that maybe Lourdes and Christine had when they were being in college. Like there's a lot of like factors that go in. So like mentorship is really important because you're helping address like the different problems that you might need to address like the community issues or just to help, I guess. I'm sorry if I'm getting like wrapped up, but yeah, it's like continuously like you're continuously building that community. It's not just like it's established and that's like fixed. You're always finding ways to improve, ways to be more inclusive, and just realizing that it's not just like a set of certain identities. There's like a lot of intersection of identities that need to be represented.
I think I think mentoring is such a delicate balance. And I think that sometimes we conflate what mentoring is with like these other relationships of like people who kind of guide your journey throughout life, whether that's professional or personal. And I think that there's also a perceived notion that mentoring always means is somehow attached with age, or I think, Christine, to the point that you were making earlier with like certain accomplishments, which I think, even in this conversation, I mean, Christine could be my mentoring when it comes to activism, right? Daniela could be my mentoring when it comes to my mentor when it comes to something else. I think that the idea of mentoring to me is, we in LMA we call our mentors madrinas, which really feels like, culturally that, or like I think about like when we talk about consejos, like to me, a consejo is not just like advice, like it's like wisdom that I'm giving to you, right? Like in Spanish, our language has such deeper meaning. I feel like sometimes that its sentido doesn't cross over into English, but I think that this idea of mentoring, I think at different stages of your life, I think with different goals that you have, your mentor can look radically different, right? Sometimes they're going to look like you. Sometimes they're going to have a similar background. Sometimes they're going to have more knowledge. Sometimes they're on that journey with you. Like, I really believe in peer mentoring. I really believe in that, like, close peer. Like, we've tried that with LMA of like, not just women that, on paper you might have achieved more, but this person again is a content expert in this particular track that you want to learn more about. And so that idea that we can learn from each other and that this can be a reciprocal relationship, and I think that happens at all levels, but I think it's just important to put out there. The other concept that I think is also important, and I think this happens more in the professional setting, is that everyone is not going to be elevated to your mentor because you're not going to always have that kind of relationship, or they might not have that kind of time. But having someone who can promote you, like a promoter, like your hype man, woman, person, whatever, that can really say they're in this position, and when they're in a meeting and they're thinking about that person for this thing, they have you in mind. They can say, Irma is dope. This is the person we want for this project, right? Like, it's not, because they're not always going to have the time to sit down with you month by month, week by week, to review your goals, but you just want them to really like you and believe in you, right? And think about you. You want again, manifesting your dreams. You want to go to someone and say, Lourdes, this is the thing that I want to do. If you put that in, I lock it in my head. And the next time the opportunity comes up, it's going to come up for me of, oh, I have that perfect person for you. And that's something easy that every single one of us can do, no matter where you are in your career. And I think with LMA, us building this network of professional Latinas, that's what we try to do, right? If you think about like professional organizations, Black sororities and fraternities are amazing at this, right? It's a lifelong commitment to be part of that organization. And when you see that pin, or they do their like, their little sorority sound or sign or whatever, people are like, oh, you are my sister, right? And that's the same kind of mentality we should all have all the time, but we actually think we need these formal relationships or titles to do that for each other, when that's just a falsehood, right? So how are you really building meaningful relationships where someone can play that role of promoting you, of guiding you, of being your madrina, of being your prima to the side that's like, I'm looking out for you, girl. Like, how do we promote those relationships in our lives? Because that's really like your kitchen cabinet of people who are going to look out for you, and you can look out for them. And then that's when we're building like community, wealth. That's when we're building social capital together. And you see these people who have these strong networks. That's because that's what they're constantly doing, is building these meaningful relationships, whether it has the title or not. But there are people who are moving us ahead as a people, because that's how we're working and moving in the world.
Wow, thank you all for all your amazing answers. And actually, thinking about building meaningful relationships, as we close, we have our last 2 minutes here. I want to pose this question of our students right now. Most of the folks seeing this are high school students, especially given the pandemic, etc. It's been extremely difficult building those friendships, those meaningful relationships. What kind of advice or consejos do you have for building community and for seeking out mentorship? Let's pose this question first to Daniela, then go to Lourdes, and end with Christine.
Yeah, definitely. So it's like, I know it's hard, especially with everything being virtual and stuff, but maybe taking like that extra, I'm going to come to class 5 minutes early, or I'm going to stay to class 5 minutes like later to like talk to the teacher, whether it's just like, oh, I was confused about this, or I really liked this book that we reviewed today. Like, do you have any other recommendations? And like building community. Don't be scared to use like the Zoom chat. Maybe you see someone have like a poster of a show you like or like band you like. Be like, oh, hey, you listen to that. So there's like little ways that you could still get those interactions you would have had like when you were physically in the classroom, even like via Zoom. Like I know we're all kind of like attention, like affection starved. So it's like it's intimidating to make that first step, but often it'll be like reciprocated well since the people are in the same boat.
I would say, you know, pull on the strength and the bravery of your ancestors, and don't be scared to put yourself out there and connect with people. There's a ton of organizations here in Columbus. There's Proyecto Mariposas. There's all kinds of organizations that are out there that will provide a space for Latinos that they can see themselves. And if you're not in Columbus, you in your community somewhere, there are places for us, right? And it's not even just the places for us, but like follow those interests and start to make those connections, not just again with your peer groups, but with other people. You can meet with community leaders. You can meet with, you know, if there's a career path that you have. I mean, what I have learned in my life is that the road has not always been paved for me, right? And we've seen this. Our parents have done it. Our ancestors did it. Our abuelitas, our abuelitos, like if there's one thing that we are as a people is we are some hustlers, right? We bake something, create something, make something. We are multi-talented as a people. So you put those talents to use. And when you see somebody who is doing the thing that you want to do, don't be scared to make that connection and have that connection with them, because it's going to pay back. It's going to come back to you, right? Look for that internship, look for that opportunity. And even if it's not there, create it. Work on a campaign, on a political campaign, work on these. Put yourself out there, because the more you do that, the more that you're going to get back. And it's going to get easier every single time that you do it. And I'm telling you, when you start to do it, when we see each other, tell me, and you guys can all, you ladies can all nod, people can all nod. Tell me that when you don't see someone who looks like us, who's out there, that you're not like, vente pa acá, come on, let's go. You're like, I'm on your team, right? Like, let's go, we're ready to do this. So that will start to happen. You know, the more seeds that you put out there, the more flowers that will grow.
And I'll just answer really quick because I know we're short on time, but I think I'll just add that I think in this time, one of the best ways to connect and feel supported with community is mutual aid networks. I think so much we've seen over the last year is that, you know, with the government honestly completely abandoning millions of people in crisis situations, something really beautiful that's blossomed out of that is mutual aid becoming a more mainstream concept. And the beautiful thing about that is that can really like look like so many different things, whether it's like working with the people in your city or your campus or your building or in your class, and really mutual in the sense that, you know, maybe at one moment you can donate or like drive someone somewhere or pick up groceries, and then maybe at some point you're going to need help in that same way. And I think that's just one of really the kind of the beautiful thing that we're having to see is that you know, the government is not doing that for people in this moment, but so the connections that people can make, having to take care of each other because there's literally no other option. There's actually a lot of opportunity to connect to people in that way.
Wow, thank you all so much for all of your insightful comments and responses. Obviously, I wish we had more time to just connect and chat about everything. Speaking of like connecting with people, we will be having posting your social media handles, etc., in case people want to connect with folks. Anyways, thank you all again. This is the last panel or live panel session for today. Please remember to stick around after this to see the other asynchronous videos happening on YouTube. So yeah, just thank you. Enjoy the rest of LRMD.